And what happened, and these dates are in the timeline that I sent Michael, and hopefully they're also in the link on our website, NRRA.net, that you can pick up. We have a whole section that leads off on China's sword because it is so complicated. But this was a video that, it's a trailer even, that if you watch it, you'll be appalled at this family they're living on a pile of plastic. And that's how they survive, is by going through the pile and trying to pick out the remnants that are valuable and then getting them sold on the market. And the urban legend is that Xi Jinping saw this and was appalled. And at that point, along with some other indicators, he realized they had to do something different. He made a speech, as you can see on the right-hand box, where Xi looks to strengthen his hand at the upcoming Communist Party Congress. This was in April of 17. And as most of you are aware, he became president for life after this Congress. And part of his platform, if you will, was the fact that he had 89 mentions of the environment and just 70 of the economy. This would have been a complete reversal of what typically would take place. So he made it a point to take this on personally. They had as you know, they control the media, so they televised the raids to enforce the National Sword Program. They showed the materials being shipped back and the contamination. This was a big deal. This was not just a matter of saving face, but this was a very important part of how the president's going to manage the environment and the economy going forward. So in July of last year, July 17, all of the work from the 2013 Green Fence upward culminated in the fact they notified officially the World Trade Organization, we're not taking this material anymore. Not that you're going to pass a certain amount of contamination, really. I think they came out with a 0.003 contamination rate. And everybody said, oh, wait, we can't do that. That's impossible. They said, okay, we'll make it 0.005. We'll talk a little bit later about single stream plants that can, if they're lucky on a good day, make a 15% contamination rate. There's no way in God's green earth that anybody in the United States is going to hit 0.005 contamination. So basically it was a ban, we're not taking it. And mixed paper and plastics took the biggest hit. Those were the ones that really put everybody into a tizzy, if you will, here in the United States. And this is why it kind of got to that. 60% of the groundwater is unfit for human consumption. 19% of the arable land contained heavy metals, and only 84 out of 338 prefecture level or higher cities attained the national standard for air quality. You could actually send your kids outside without a mask. I highlighted this last one. It wasn't underlined in the presentation that we got from ISRI, but rising social pressure. Pollution-related social incidents, leading cause of social instability. The government of Xi Jinping is concerned that his population may revolt. Not just about the environment, not just about the economics. They may just decide, hey, you're not doing a good enough job of taking care of us. We're going to have somebody else. That gets them motivated pretty well. And they got to this point, decades of putting economic growth above the environment. Like I say, you always heard about the economy, you never heard about the environment. Lack of enforcement of existing laws. There was a lot of backdoor, if you will, movement of materials. If it didn't meet specifications, well, that's all right, we'll take it over here at this other mill. And they would take it, and then they would just dump it, the stuff that they couldn't process. But the biggest one is 100 million new cars on the road in the last decade. The impact of that on the atmosphere has got to be incredible. So you tie that with everything up top, and you can see why the growing middle class of China would not be happy with their lives. And that would become a real push for Xi Jinping. There's a million pictures online that show this type of sorting, not just in China, but around the world. Certainly at landfills where people actually live on the landfills. But this is the kind of production that was going on, I would think, more with the black market type material. I have seen pictures that show clean work environments workers with uniforms. I'm impressed with these folks. Most of them have masks, but it's not a very nice environment to work in, certainly, and probably not too efficient. And when you're talking about leaded glass from CRTs, from e-waste, this is probably not a very healthy way to take care of that material, which would lead to a lot of dumping, which would lead to even more pollution and lead to more pollution of the water and the land as well.
Michael?
Yes, sir.
You want to make sure you explain what acronyms are, since these people don't work in this field?
Sorry, CRTs is cathode ray tubes. That's the video monitors that were before flat screens, the old chunky ones that weigh so much. I'll try and remember the rest of them as well. So this was I put this one in because Jerry Powell is really a mentor to everyone in the recycling business. He's out of the West Coast in Oregon. And he did a presentation for us in 2016, and this was part of it. And this was before the 2017 speech that the president made. And he was recognizing that China may no longer be the world's factory media, because they were publicizing all these actions to reassure that they were trying to take some positive action. So in 2016, the United States industry of recycling was kind of paying attention to this, trying to get better non-contaminated material to China, but not really expecting it to be a big deal. The conversation would go with, well, they've done this before, it's going to be fine. The reason that it matters so much is because China takes approximately 30% of all recyclables collected, exported outside the U.S. Hong Kong and China account for almost 70% of all of our exports for plastics, other than for #1 PET plastic. So they're a huge consumer, and you'll see these, and a lot of these charts we're not going to spend a lot of time on. They're there for you to go back and look at if you ever need to dig even deeper into it. But suffice it to say that China is the 800-pound gorilla in the recycling industry, and still is, even when they've shut stuff off, because there's been no ramp up since they've gone ahead and done that. This one shows you the amount of material of their share of the global imports for selected materials. And you can see that copper scrap, they take in 55% of the world's copper scrap that's recycled. 24% of the aluminum scrap, 55% of your recovered fibers, and your plastic, 51%. So if they stop taking plastic, that's a huge number. And has an immediate impact on the recycling industry here in the United States and in the rest of the world.
Michael, I have a question.
Yep.
Chris, you want to turn on your microphone for a sec?
Yeah, thanks. I was just really curious from this and also the earlier readings, what contributes to a black market of recycling? I mean, what's so illicit about it that it would need to turn to those, a hidden market?
Well, I think the best one is the example of the material coming back to the United States. If you're a broker and you've sold 20 containers to a mill in China to process, and those 20 containers get over there and the mill says, we're not going to take it, you don't want to pay $200,000 for those 20 containers to come back to the United States. So you're scrambling, and a lot of the companies that or brokers that were involved in shipping directly to China, as soon as this WTO, World Trade Organization piece hit, they were on a plane to South Vietnam, to India, to Thailand, to anywhere to reroute ships before they even got to China, so that they could keep their costs down, so they didn't want to have to pay for that material coming back. Imagine you've got 20 containers and they come back and they're all stamped rejected by China when they hit Long Beach on the way back. Who's going to buy those? You're going to have to find a landfill to take them, which is what happens. And then you've got additional costs. So you've made the deal with the supplier. Let's say back on the East Coast in New Jersey, a MRF sent you 20 containers of material. You've already paid them, if you paid them. And now you're trying to move that material. And if that stops, and you're on the hook for the cost of the logistics part of it, you're in trouble. And you're in trouble quickly. Good question, Chris.
Thank you.
This one just shows that there are restrictions on quotas with import licenses. It wasn't just a fact that they shut down and said, we're not going to take this material at all. For the material that they would take, they limited the capacity of material that they were taking because they wanted to take and clean up their own domestic infrastructure first. They wanted to shift the focus from having this stuff all over the place to taking it in and trying to recycle it, which they felt would clean up the environment. And they knew they couldn't do it with our material coming in and using up that capacity. So they only issued so many of these import licenses, if you will. They cut down the numbers that had been in play. They pretty much caught up with the folks that were trying to make the side deals and go around the regulations. And a lot of the smaller mills that were involved with that secondary black market, if you will, were shut down. So that by the time they get through, they're probably going to have 7 or 9 large mills in China. They'll be not physically only 7 facilities, but companies, if you will. That'll be the more legitimate companies that will take care of, first and foremost, their domestic material, and then if they still need material, then they'll open it back up, but it'll be very limited. That's what we're being told. The blue sky is simply the same thing as the earth goddess you saw inspecting the other bales. It doesn't do you any good to announce a new program if you don't put some teeth in it. And they've been increasing their inspections, and they've been publicizing the combating of smuggling and foreign garbage and the false forms and declarations they've been seeing. So they publicize this a great deal. This has got a lot of teeth in it, and you'll see the results here in a minute. This one I can't see on my right side easily. Well, I guess I can. On the right side, you have recovered paper and fiber export volume. And you can see where we're shipping our material to, top 15 destinations. China's at 14 million tons, and the next one is at India, and then it goes down from there. So if this 14 million stops moving, it's got to go somewhere. It's not going to stop being collected because the collection systems are all in place and they're all pumping the material into the system. The same over here with scrap plastic, 67% of our exports. And you can see here in the first one, China is the light blue in January and March of 16, and then in the dark blue is January, March of 17. You see our huge ramp up of our exports to China. That was in anticipation of that April 17 declaration. They were trying to stockpile as much stuff as they could get in, the bandits, if you will, and plus everybody else, because they didn't know what was going to happen. So these two side by side show you how important China is to us in terms of both fiber and in plastics. Just to make you feel better that we're not alone, this was Europe from January of 17 to November of 17, from 874 tons, million tons rather, down to 432. So the material that China bought from Europe was cut in half. It didn't stop piling up. It didn't stop getting collected. But China only took half, and then Indonesia, Turkey, India, Vietnam, Taiwan all tried to make up the difference. And you see down here, there's nobody down here. That's because they couldn't handle that material. This one shows you the difference between their domestic and their imported material. The imported material was the blue, and the domestic was the red. And you can see over time how, starting back in 2002, they ramped up their export or import volume, but then they started kicking in their domestic volume. And so they're up around 45, almost 50 million tons versus 15 in terms of domestic capacity. So they've really ramped up their domestic capacity. This was done in 15 before the bottom fell out, which you'll see in a minute. But this piece right up here is the piece that's at risk. That's the material that we and everybody else was sending to them. And that's the piece that they really stomped on. Michael, you can hear me okay?
Yeah, fine, thanks.
Okay. So the world's largest plastic scrap exporter is us, unfortunately. And you can see it's been pretty steady. It's about 2 million tons annually. The rest of the world really drops off in terms of volume. And you'll see shortly that we've ramped up our production of plastic, but we ramped it up and shipped it to China and they bought it.
You ramped up your production of recycled plastic, right?
Sorry, recycled plastic, yes. So that's how the market was created that we were living in up till about 16 when the wheels came off. This gives you a visual that tells you what we're doing in terms of trash itself, in terms of total MSW's municipal solid waste. For those of you that have curbside recycling, I don't think you do in Keene, but for those of you that do have curbside, this is where your trash goes after it leaves you at the end of your driveway, if you will. And we've been pretty flatlined, pretty consistent in terms of how much we've been generating, in terms of the total municipal solid waste, and the percentage of recycling's been stuck right around 34%. This was in 12, but the numbers pretty much stay the same for the most recent data. So we've been stuck, and that's been the piece that we've bemoaned, is how do we get beyond 34%? We know it makes sense to recycle it if we do it right, but how do we get that 34% to be 65% and flip it? Again, Jerry weighed in 16. We've seen this fundamental shift in critical recycling markets.
Jerry Powell, right?
Jerry Powell, sorry. The lengthy rise in Chinese demand in the past 2 decades resulted in systemic changes in the American recycling market. And again, this was 16, right before everything else started changing, but he was so forward-looking that he could see what was happening. China was paying higher prices for the same material than our domestic businesses could afford to pay, because they had the advantage of certainly the shipping costs, but also they were shipping the materials right back. They were selling so much stuff into our market. They needed the packaging, and they could pay a premium for it. And it had a devastating effect on the domestic markets, the capacity that we have here domestically. This was I took this specifically because it shows a number of things, different commodities and their recycling rates. Remembering we're on average 34% of the municipal solid waste we're recycling, but these are specific categories. Auto batteries have been leading the way for a long time as the highest percentage of recycled material that we have in the United States. And it's based on 2 critical factors. The first is there's a ban on throwing batteries in landfills in most every state in the United States. And why is that? Is because the batteries have acid in them. And acid would eat through the liner of the landfill, which would cause the whole thing to fail. And you'd start having leachate coming out of your landfills, and you'd have a massive expense in cleanup. So the one is the legislative piece of the puzzle is in place. And the other one is you get paid about 25 or 35 cents a pound for the battery. You actually get money. It's called basic motivation. It works really well. People bring batteries to the transfer stations. Transfer stations sell them through us sometimes and sometimes others. And we send them a check. And you get a 96% rate. Newsprint, 67.6%. When we say newsprint, we mean the category very specific of number 8 news, which was just plain clean newsprint. There no cereal boxes in with it, no beer carriers in with it, no other junk, just newspaper. And that didn't have a ban necessarily, but it had a value that was higher than the regular residential mix of material that gets, we're going to be talking about in a little bit. Steel cans were a good one because they could be recycled with your scrap metal, and aluminum cans have always had a value. Tires, plastic, glass gets recycled about the national rate, and then more plastic, and then we have food scraps down below. But the one to remember is the auto batteries, legislative authority and a value economically.
Hey, Michael, I have a question.
Yes.
So, Natty, you want to turn on your microphone and ask the question?
Hi, Michael. Thanks for being with us. My question is there any recognizable link between China's preparation for the 2008 Olympics and what has become the green fence and China sword?
No, except that it was a warning shot. Because what happened there, that was in 2008. What they did was they actually stockpiled material leading up to the Olympics. So you're right on target. They've used this before in terms of cleaning up the air. In June of '08, they were paying something ungodly like $300 or $350 a ton for cardboard because they were stockpiling. They wanted to get as much as they could in place. And then all of a sudden in July, they stopped buying it, and no one could figure out what's going on. Well, they stopped buying it because they shut down all the mills, so you could actually see the birdcage stadium that they built. And they had enough material stockpiled so that after the Olympics, they could get started again. And then, of course, they would be back in the buying mode once the Olympics passed, having ramped up. The problem with that strategy is that it didn't take into account the economic collapse of '08, which happened in September. So nobody was buying a flat screen TV. Nobody needed cardboard, and they were sitting there. And by the time we got to January of '09, not 3 or 4 months later, if you were lucky, you could move your cardboard at zero.
That's zero revenue, right?
Zero revenue, and you would not be charged for it. But there was a lot of material that you shipped your cardboard and you had to pay $25 a ton to ship it because the markets just weren't there. But those people that didn't have capacity to store it, they couldn't hold on to it, so they had to ship it. Where they were shipping it to had no place to send it. There were pictures on CNN of it coming out the windows of some of these storage houses. But it was a different rationale than what they're doing now. But I think it gave them, it could have very well given them the idea that we've seen how this works. We know we can shut this off, and we know we can survive without it.
So, Michael, hate to interrupt. I have another question from Rachel.
No problem.
Rachel, you want to turn on your microphone?
Yep, I got it. Sorry. So I have kind of a question about the economics of everything. So firstly, given our need in this country for manufacturing jobs, especially recently since we've been cutting back on coal, why haven't we focused more of recycling activities here? Is that kind of outsourcing is cheaper and so we send it overseas because they do it for less than we would? So that's sort of part one of the question. And then given that now we don't have the market that we previously had, is this a situation where now we're going to have all these people here on the ground scrambling to get recycling businesses going? Is that going to take a decade? So I guess I'm asking for a little bit of economic explanation for why we were sending it there in the first place, and what are we going to do about it now that we can't send it there?
All good questions, and a lot of it, like I say, the presentation is going to jump around a little bit, but I want to answer it now, and then we'll reinforce it later.
Thanks.
The reason we were sending it there in the first place is they were paying a higher price. Flat and simple. If you had cardboard and you could sell it to China for $250 a ton, and the best you could get domestically was $225, it goes to China. After a while, the $225 domestically isn't here anymore. It's out of business because it needed material that it couldn't match the price point. In terms of the China National Sword action that's taken place, a great many people believe they've actually done us a huge favor because we can't stop collecting it. We have contracts with municipalities and large corporations that are collecting it right now as we're talking about it. So the flow of material is not going to stop. It has to go somewhere. And if people realize that, and they at the same time they have waste bans like in Oregon and Washington State or Massachusetts or Vermont, it says you can't throw recyclables in a landfill, then they've got to find a home for that material. they estimate between 2.5 to 5 years at the earliest, we'll see the first impact of domestic development of capacity. So your 10 years isn't far off. Between 5 and 10 years out, you're going to see more and more mills come online to be able to handle the volume that's out there. You're going to see more innovation, I believe, in plastics, especially because they're causing such an issue. But just in general, we have the opportunity now to create more domestic jobs. And the recycling industry, I think, produces something like it produces 10 jobs for every ton of recycled material versus 1 job for every landfill ton, because you only need 1 person in a bulldozer to bury it. But you need 10 people along the line to collect it, put it in the right container, ship it, sort it, and then get it to market for reuse. So yes, it's a costly operation, but if you consider that we're at 7 billion people now and we're going to be at 9 billion people very quickly, we're going to need all that material. Because last I looked, we don't have another source sitting out here next to us, so we can just go and dig holes in that one and bring the material back. In terms of the economics, and we'll get to some more of that, just to give you a reference, the 15-year average for cardboard normally sold about $100 to $120 a ton. That was the domestic value of the material. So when the international market of China and some others came into play and were paying something to the brokers, they'd pay $300, the brokers would pay $250. Those numbers would just blow the domestic folks out of the water. Okay?
Thank you.
If I missed it, don't hesitate to come back.
Yeah, well, why don't you proceed?
Okay. I don't have a watch on me either, Michael, so you can tell me when I'm supposed to hurry up or slow down.
Hurry up.
Back in October of 2015, this fellow John Tierney really rocked the boat with a New York Times article, and it's not presented here really well, but it's enough. Recycling industry facing a nationwide crisis, Waste Management CEO says. This is October rather, of 15. So this is way before the China sword. This was when they were recognizing that things were changing in the evolving ton of plastic. There wasn't as much value anymore. There was more plastic, less value, more plastic, less weight because of the way they were making it. And recycling was getting to be in trouble economically. And the CEO of Waste Management, which happens to be the largest company in the United States that handles it, was saying, if we can't make money in recycling, we're not going to do it. And for 2 years, they stopped investing in recycling infrastructure. They used to invest something like $200 million a year minimum, and they just stopped doing that in new processing plants or new recycling market development. They just stopped because it wasn't making them any money. They made more money when they put it in the ground. So prior to China sword, the domestic pieces that are in play here are happening almost in another world from what happened with China sword. And China sword just dropped at the absolute perfect storm kind of time.
Okay.
According to Waste Management.
I have a question. Miranda, I see you've raised your hand. I don't see it. So if you got a question, why don't you turn on your microphone?
Yeah, hi. I am having a hard time typing it, so I just raised a hand. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You're perfect.
Okay, great. I guess I was wondering what was going to be the driving factor behind our development. Like, I really feel like obviously we're going to start building these new mills and coming up with innovations around plastics and plastic disposal or recycling. But is it the fact that we won't have anywhere to put all of the recyclables? Is it the fact that we'll be losing a ton of money in the industry by not being able to sell scrap materials to China anymore? Like, I guess what are the driving factors?
We're not going to have any place to put it. And, and it's going to break the budget of every small town in New England. We just had 3 towns in New Hampshire, Hollis, not Hollis. It was Hooksett, Franklin, and Laconia. All three had curbside single stream recycling programs that they would come by every other week and pick up your container, put it in the packer truck, and take it down to a large processing facility. Those three towns, I think, actually went into an intermediary. Then it was transloaded to a larger one down in Boston, which would then be sold. Back in, I want to say March, April, May of this year, they had to make a decision to pick up the material, but take it instead to the burn plant in Pennacook. So their 34% recycling rate is now 100% trash rate. And the reason they had to do that was it only cost them $70 to put it in the burn plant. It was costing them $114 to take it to the recycling facility. And we're going to see some examples of how those numbers got to where they were. And they only had $35 a ton in their budget. Nashua, New Hampshire had a contract for their single stream material, which I think they budgeted again at 35 as a maximum. And when they renegotiated the contract this June, they had to add $400,000 to their line item. At the current rate that they're going through, paying for the material, they think they're going to come in at $720,000. They're going to have to choose between hiring teachers and police people and paying their recycling bill. We're also going to run out of landfill space, which we're going to talk about. Does that help, Miranda?
Yes. Very,
not really, I know. Sorry.
It was good, though, because I was having an argument with my friend earlier today about it. So I'm going to cite you now.
Uh-oh, I don't want to be cited.
Yep.
Part of that just leads right into the slide, too. Because of what China Soar did with their 0.005, it's awfully hard to get to that. And you can't get to it at all with a large single stream plant that's putting, massive amounts of material through their processing.
Michael, you mentioned single stream a number of times. You might want to just explain the difference between single stream and commingle.
Single stream is commingle on steroids, but single stream or zero sort means you put all of your recyclable material or what you think can be recycled in the bin. The other bin is trash and probably has organics in it. And you want to keep the organics in that because the organics contaminate recyclables. A typical commingled program would consist of two containers. One would have fibers and the other would have containers, plastic, glass, or aluminum. And that was the I think all of those plants that did exist in New England were converted over from 2012 to 2016, 17. They went from dual stream to what was considered to be the rage of single stream or zero sort or no sort. What happens with the contamination and the reason that single streams run into problems is China won't buy it anymore because of contamination, and people have done things like put engine blocks in their recycling bin. They put garden hoses in there. They put plastic bags. The grocery bags, most everybody is taking back to the grocery stores now, but come January 1 of 19, at least one company will refuse to take any type of plastic bag whatsoever. So if you put your recyclables in a plastic bag and put that in your recycling bin at the end of the driveway or what have you, it's going to get refused, or you're going to get charged an ungodly amount for it because it's a contamination that it fouls up the processing of sorting when it gets down to the facility, and you'll see that in a couple of slides. The contamination piece is so important because it drives up the cost of everything. It drives up the cost of the recycling, and it drives up the cost of the processing costs, as you see here. And if you think it can be up to about 50% of incoming loads, that means 50% of what you paid something for to the municipality under your old contract is now being charged to you because you've got to put that in a landfill or find a burn plant to take it. It's not worth anything to you. And I don't know the sequence of events here, but hopefully we'll get to the slides that show how single stream plants have been flipped on their head in terms of their economics, which is driving all the numbers that we talk about daily. But when waste management tells you the contamination of loads is an average of 16% of inbound, but can be up to 50%, that's a huge problem. That isn't even on the same planet as what China's playing with. And more importantly, even if we were able to get it down to meet those specifications of 0.005, because they're focused so much on domestic capacity, they still aren't going to buy the material. So we're forced into having to find new capacity, develop new facilities to take the material. And this is a blurry slide almost on purpose because there isn't a plant in the United States, I think, that has the same instructions for their population as to what they'll take and what they won't take. We just talked about what is okay to put into your bin, but that won't be true if you're in Maine. It's one thing. If you're in Mass, it's another. If you're in Connecticut, it's a third. And if you're in the Napa Valley of California, it could be 4 different ones in the same valley. So it's a very confusing for the population. It's also very confusing because plastic is changing so much. It's very confusing now because of the contamination rates. What may have been okay for these posters a week ago don't pass muster anymore. It's all glass's fault. The biggest one here is Houston City Council approves new recycling contract, excludes glass. Glass can be recycled, but it's very expensive for single stream processing plants to recycle it because it gets broken. And if you think about how it gets collected, I was in Goffstown doing a waste audit. The truck goes along and picks up the individual recycling bins and throws the material into the truck. So when it hits the truck, the glass breaks. It gets squished with the ram. When it gets squished with the ram, the glass breaks. Then it brings it to the transloading floor, dumps it on the concrete floor, the glass breaks. Then the Bobcat loads it into the 100-yard trailer to go to Boston, the glass breaks again. By the time it gets to Boston, that entire 100-yard trailer of 20 tons of material is littered with broken glass. It's 100% contaminated. And when it gets down to Boston, they're going to turn around and say, you know what? Instead of charging you $80 a ton or whatever it is, we're going to charge you $225 a ton for contaminated material. They've already seen an increase in that town. They're going to have to budget at least $175,000 they don't have to take care of their recycling costs. And it would be cheaper for them to throw it in the trash. Remember, your trash number is about 70 on average. It'll be going up shortly, but right now it's about 70 to 75. Your recycling number is anywhere from 120 to 140 for single stream recycling. So glass is one that it really has to come out, and we've worked really hard on programs to do that, to be able to take care of the glass so it doesn't go in the material, but that means you've got another sort. Okay, where do I put the glass? If I don't put it in the trash and I don't put it in the recycling, now I've got to put it somewhere else. So while all this other noise is happening, we stopped reading newspapers. Can't imagine why. Couldn't have anything to do with phones, didn't have anything to do with computers, tablets, nothing else. We dropped from 15 million tons to 5 million tons over this 14-year period. It's gotten even worse. If you look at a USA Today, if it's lucky, it's got 4 pages. That's the valuable material, though. The fiber in the newspaper, that's really valuable. So what's happening to it? It's disappearing. I think the folks in British Vancouver estimate that in another 5 years, there'll be no newspaper in the province. And remember, we said China was buying up all the material and newspaper was disappearing. All of these groups lost mills in New England as a result. So if all these mills go away, and assume there's 2 or 3 for each one of these listed, if all these mills disappear and all of a sudden you've got all this fiber because China's not buying it, well, we'll send it to Caraustar, we'll send it to Smart. Oh, they're not there anymore.
Michael,
now we've got to start from scratch.
You explain what paperboard is for everyone?
Well, it can be a mixture of what we talked about before. Help me out, Michael, with a good example.
A cereal box.
Yeah, sorry. Cereal box, paper towel cores, any kind of brown board like that, packaging of any kind that would be in that brown thing. It's not exactly cardboard itself, but it's like craft paper in some cases. In any event, the key part is we've got the material we're still collecting, but now we can't take it anymore. And that's going to drive that domestic capacity that has to come on board, or we're going to be looking at piles of stuff all over.
Okay. Gonna stop. You got a question from Natty? You got a question?
Yeah. So there's currently programs, I believe, in the I don't know if it's in beta phase or past that, companies like PepsiCo and others who are at least proposing contributions to the minimizing of non and recyclable materials in their waste stream. And do we have a projected % of recyclable scrap reduction due to these policies and programs?
Your second question, no, we don't have any projection because we're not sure exactly what they're going to end up with. It's not just PepsiCo. Excuse me, Coca-Cola is working with a firm down in Leominster, Mass. to try and take their bottle caps back and turn them into some other product that's going to be used domestically here. But it's not off the ground yet because a lot of stuff is in development. I know they looked at switching over to aluminum cans, then they switched back to plastic bottoms and an aluminum top for the Monster drink. That was really ridiculous because the plastic people didn't want it and the aluminum people didn't want it. It just made a mess. I think all of the national or international companies currently are trying to look good in that they're looking to make an environmental contribution. A lot of times it's very sincere. Sometimes it's greenwashing, but you hear things like Subaru, zero landfill. That doesn't mean it didn't go somewhere else, but they recognize that the folks that are their customers put a value on that. How much of a value and how much can they restructure their production lines to make it work is to be seen, but it's going to have to happen. It's going to be forced. It's going to be forced either legislatively or economically, one or the other.
Okay. Anton, you have a question?
Yeah, from the previous slide, I was wondering if any of these facilities that closed down still exist. You know, I drive by an old paper mill where we go to camp in Maine every year, and it just kind of sits there. I was wondering if all of these kind of still have the infrastructure there that could be fired back up, or would it still need to be like a whole new operation?
The folks that are on this list, I think Abitibi is definitely out of business. Their physical plants may still be sitting there. Fusion Paper down in Western Connecticut, I know, is just sitting there empty, and they'd had a major rework. Most of these now are sitting, and this will go to whether or not you should continue to build new single stream plants as well. They're sitting with, okay, how much money are we going to have to invest to retool to get up to the new standards that we never had to worry about before? They had EPA regulations and all those kinds of things, but the actual product they were producing and where they could, the amount of contamination it could have was much higher. So who's going to make that investment if they don't know what's going to happen in the marketplace? If you think the trade tariffs, and I want to make sure I say that none of this has anything to do with the tariff wars that are going on. This is all before that this has all happened. But if you think about it, the marketplace itself is so uncertain that no one is in their right mind is going to invest the kind of money it takes to bring these back online unless they can be assured that they're going to have a profit when they get done. So right now everybody's kind of sitting and waiting and then trying to make those advances they can, like I said with Coca-Cola and PepsiCo, like you outlined. But those are folks that really have the bucks to withstand it. If it doesn't work, then they're not going to be wiped out. But the smaller folks, not at all. That plant you go by in Maine is probably going to stay shuttered.
Thank you.
This just shows you the increase in MRFs MRFs being municipal recycling facilities or materials recycling facilities if they're independently owned. And we've created a lot of them with the idea that consolidation is good and bigger is better. And that was working really well up until this China sword deal, when all these bigger facilities found out that their contamination rate was so high that their material was, they were being charged for now, or it was costing them to process it more than they were taking in revenue. So all these bigger and better and more volume facilities were going, please do not bring us your single stream. For every ton of single stream you bring me, I'm paying 75% to get rid of it. I've got 25% in revenue, and it's not covering my costs. It's not long before you're not in business. But this is what they look like when they're brand new and haven't had anything to prove them. Sorry, Michael.
No, go ahead. I have a question from someone who can't speak himself because of his connection, but I'll read it to you after you've done the next couple slides of MRF.
Okay. Again, all of the plants are designed a little bit differently. They're not the same. But the ramp up in processing has been what's exacerbated this problem. No one would have built all these plants if they had thought they weren't going to make money. Unfortunately, when they did build them, they were basing it. Oh yeah, as Jerry Powell said, larger is better. They were basing it on the economics of 2011, which we're going to look at, when the pricing was really good. So if you were able to collect tons and you were able to get paid for the tons at that $160 to $180 a ton rate, you'd make a lot of money. So the more the better. You can see here from 2012 to 2016, the big jump, over 100 more single stream. These are just single stream. The other ones were just regular processing facilities, but not limited to single stream. So you can see 12 to 16 was a huge jump, and you can imagine the time invested to raise the capital, get your permits, actually build and construct the facility itself. I know one facility that was 10 years in development. But if you're gonna build a facility, you're probably gonna base it on 2011 numbers, and the 2011 numbers were outstanding. But this is what happens when you produce a lot of mixed paper. So this is Mr. Ben Harvey, who owns one of those single stream plants.
Let me just jump in there because I have two questions that are related.
Yep.
One from a pair, and he said, the President Xi added his voice and made it a political issue. Is it more political, or is it really an issue about self-sufficiency? And then Natty, I'm just going to read it. That, you know, there are Chinese companies such as Seven Dragons purchasing factory space in places like Huntsville, Alabama. Can we assume this is a trend? So the question is, you know, is this actually an economic move by China as opposed to a pollution issue that you raised?
I sincerely believe, and I have no corroboration, that it's the environmental issue that's outweighing the economics.
Okay.
I think that the Politburo in China, if they have one or whatever they call that, their governing body, aside from the president, realize that if they continue to go down the road they are, their population at one point or another is going to revolt. But now there may be some economic benefit to what they're doing, certainly, but I don't think it's political or economic for them as much as it is environmental.
Okay.
As far as Seven Dragons, they've actually purchased 2 plants in the United States already, and they are one of the larger mills in China. So they have all their permits and their licenses and their import allocations. My guess is that China's telling them, if you go and buy in the United States and produce the material there, we'll count it, or we won't count it against your allocation here. There's an economic benefit for them doing that. And they're in a position to do it because they've made out so well over the last 10 years. Whereas our domestic folks are still getting knocked back with their heels. They don't have that kind of reserve to go ahead and just buy new plants, although WestRock did buy one in Washington State and then shut it down.
Right. So it's an example of vertically integrating across the waters.
Sure.
Yeah.
So my good friend, Mr. Ben Harvey's out here looking at all this mixed paper that's come out the back end of his single stream plant, brand new plant that was built and opened, I think, in 2015 or 16, maybe 14, but it wasn't long before that, which he had to build as a defensive mechanism. His family's been in the recycling business for over a century, and they recycle everything. And before they built their single stream plant, they actually had a campus down in Westboro, Massachusetts, that was the recycling campus for the western part of the state, and took in material from all over Massachusetts. And they could not care where it came from, they're going to find a home for it and recycle it. So they built the single stream plant out of a defensive mechanism, and then they started producing material, and they got more and more single stream, and more people put material in their single stream bin. A lot of communities adopt single stream, and at the same time adopt pay-as-you-throw, which means if you put it in the trash container, it's going to cost you. You got to have a bag. But if you put it in the recycling bin, it's free. So you put everything you can in the recycling bin, even if it's not recyclable. But if it could be, or if it may be, or someone says, put it in there, we'll figure out how to recycle it. That was possible when you had the kind of markets that China was giving it. It's not possible anymore. So unfortunately, at this point, Ben is producing material, and he's got about 6,000 tons sitting in his parking lot. That's about 300 truckloads of material he has not got a buyer for. This is mixed paper.
So I have another question.
And
Shamika. Shamika, do you have a microphone you can ask?
Yes. I'm doing part microphone on one place, video on another, and I'm eating. Sorry. Sorry, I just got out of work. So,
That's all right. Take your time.
my question was, if China's clamping down on these issues, more specifically because of environmental reasons, how then are we going to consider those issues here in the US and avoid being plagued by them if we bring the industry back here over the next decade? Also, wouldn't it just make more sense for us to use more sustainable materials and promote using less of these materials, regardless of what they were, through various behavior change levers, like you mentioned with the batteries?
You're spot on both questions. I'm convinced that the only thing that's going to change our behavior, given the way we as a culture operate, is economics. And again, I get back to the local level. When enough towns are faced with the kind of increases that they're being faced with, and we haven't even touched yet on what the cost of regular trash is going to be. We've just talked about the cost of recycling so far, but they're intertwined. But when those numbers start to hit home, I think the governor's office here in New Hampshire, and certainly down in Massachusetts and Vermont, are going to get a lot of calls from towns saying, we can't pay this. Our people are in revolt. What are we doing? And if you sit down and look at the whole supply chain as you're forced to do when you're in this industry, it doesn't take you too long, as you've just outlined, to say, well, let's stop making this. Or let's make something we know we can recycle so that it's not going to end up in a waste stream and it's not going to end up costing us a fortune. It will. I think there's some optimistic examples of how that can work down the road. But aside from the dollar argument, the rest of it is just going to be noise, in terms of the political arena.
Thank you.
Next slide. Okay, so plastic exports, this just shows you from the time of Dustin Hoffman, those of you that are old enough to remember The Graduate. Plastics, young man, plastics. We started producing plastics, and from 97 up to whatever, we just went crazy producing plastics. So we're making all kinds of stuff that's convenient. The gas station, you can buy a sandwich in a plastic shell, and you got plastic straws, and you got plastic all over the place. We've got enough plastic. Finding plastic is not our problem. Being able to take care of the plastic when it's used once and thrown away, that really is an issue that we've got to address. No question. So as part of this and part of that ramp up, it affects recycling, landfilling, and waste incineration because as a result, there's less paper being used, more plastics up 25%, and no growth for metals. And what you see is pretty much anything in the grocery store that you go through and purchase that might at some point have been in a cardboard box or a metal jar or any other kind of container is now in a plastic wrapped something or other. So by the time you get through, all of this packaging has to go to the transfer station or to the landfill. And it's light. And Walmart can say, we're a green company because we've shipped 400 fewer semi-trucks this year because we were able to put more material on because we had less weight in our packaging. So the less weight of the packaging drives the green message that Walmart wants to get out. But when the packaging is done and the material is used, you hand it off. When you go to Best Buy and get a flat screen TV and you come home, you have a flat screen TV, you've got styrofoam, you've got plastic, and you got a cardboard box. You take all those pieces, aside from the flat screen, which you put on your wall, and you hand them off to the transfer station. Now they have to deal with them. There's no market for styrofoam, and it's so light you couldn't put 2 pounds in a semi-truck and not cost a fortune to move it. So the packaging is a huge issue for us, and especially in the plastics. All of this, between the marketplace of China, between the material being made and everything else, drove the value of the commingled ton, or the ton that comes out of the back of the single stream processing plant. You saw once that ton of material that's mixed is all source separated out, you sell the cardboard, you sell the aluminum cans, you sell the plastics 1 through 2 that you can. Once all of that is done, you get paid a dollar figure, and in this case, back in spring of 11, we're getting $165 a ton. Remember I said 2011 was the watermark for high prices for that material. This is specifically out of single stream plants. This is not regular transfer stations that might bale material and ship full loads of cardboard. This is material that's been mixed together, now been unmixed, if you will, by either optical sorters or mechanical sorters or personnel. And then the pieces sold. And the average return rate is what we have listed here. And you can see from 11 over to 16, those prices were dropping. And you can see right here in 13, there was a little dip, and then it came back up a little bit. And then we had another little dip. So you could almost say from 16 on, there was going to be another uptick. If you like to watch charts, well, maybe it'll do the same thing it did before. Here's what it did. It cratered. When China shut it off from 16, you had that little dip and uptick, it rose up, and then all of a sudden the bottom fell out. Here's April of 17 was the peak before the president made his speech. In July of 17, it dropped a little bit. But down here in October of 17, the price of cardboard went from $175 a ton down to $100 a ton in 1 month. So they were getting $165 a ton. Now they're having to pay to get rid of it because their processing costs have gone up. And what they're getting paid is maybe $20 a ton at best. So it's costing them probably $100 a ton. Before they were making money, now they're losing money. The only question is, how long can you last bleeding cash? Again, I apologize for this pie chart, but it's one that I want to try and put together for you, and I didn't quite have enough time because I'm not an Excel expert. The key part of this is in 2015, 41% of this material being sold was called old number 8 news, the newspaper. If you recall that chart that showed the newspaper dropping, what was still left was bringing in a value of $55. Cardboard was at 80. Mixed paper was at 45, but there was very little mixed paper because it was graded differently. It was graded as old number 8 news. But when you switch down to 2018, the old number 8 news has disappeared because their spec has been cleaned up, and they found out what you were really showing them was mixed paper. And unfortunately, while old number 8 news might be at 130, mixed paper was a charge of 45. So this big piece of the pie here you were getting paid for before, 3 years ago, you're now being charged for. And you're also getting tucked for the plastic 3 through 7, which was giving you revenue before, as well as the glass. And they only had glass at 5% here. It was at, I think, 25 or 23% before. And they only have residuals and trash at 5%, which we all know is not a legitimate number. But these are the public numbers that the processors use. Bottom line is before this, they were getting paid for the big part of the pie, and after this, they're being charged. So they found new ways how do they stay in business? How does Ben Harvey move that material in his parking lot? He can move it if he pays somebody $25 a ton. The other companies that are in business renegotiate their contracts with the municipalities. And the new ways of sharing risk are now being discussed in many recycling facilities, and now charging suppliers for the first time. And this was, again, Jerry Powell in 2016, before all of this happened. And not only are they charging them, they're charging them an arm and a leg for it, because they've got to make up for all this material that they've lost money on. So instead of charging them $35 a ton, they're now charging them $140 for the recyclables. So in order for us to stay in business, I think one company even calls it the sustainability fee. The only thing it's sustaining is that company. But otherwise, they can't stay in business. And when the company comes to you as a town manager and says, we can't afford to stay in business in this market, you got to help us out here, or we've got to go out of business, or we've got to break the contract or invoke force majeure, which allows us to break the contract. We don't want to do that. We don't want to leave you as a town hanging. Last I knew, not a whole lot of town managers and boards of select people have a spare Packer truck in their backyard that they can go out and pick up trash or pick up recyclables, because usually they're tied together. So it puts everybody in a tight spot.
So I have a question from Raleigh. Raleigh, can you ask the question yourself?
Was wondering, because of the recent uptick in development and producing of biodegradable and natural packaging for items, is that going to make contamination and recycling more difficult, or is that going to cause an ease for this potential problem?
Did everyone hear that?
It was kind of hard to hear here, Mike, but if I understood the part of it, the biodegradable materials,
Yes.
I think it's a small part of an emerging market. It really doesn't help us with the overwhelming amount of plastic that isn't. And Michael Simpson can speak to this better in terms of the difficulties of having composting be certified as organic if you're including material like that.
But not today.
Not today. Okay. This again is, I know we're bouncing back and forth, but this is a dramatic slide that shows you in January of 17, February and March, we were shipping about 70,000 tons to China of plastic scrap. April of 17, we take a 20,000 ton hit when the president comes out. July of 17, there's a quick uptick in shipments. Quick, get it over there before they really shut it down. And then we take another hit of another 20,000. By the time we get to December, we're about 6,000 tons a month. Times 12 is 72,000, which means we only ship 1 month, and the rest of the year has to go somewhere else. That's how big this issue is. So what we're seeing is across the country, and part of the October 19th call was we heard from people in the middle of the country and from the West Coast and Texas, as well as New England. And it's affecting people differently because of the logistics. How easily can you get to the ports to find another place to take it to if other people will take it? Can we move it at all? Are we having to pay to move it? And at the bottom, some talk of landfilling. And I can tell you that both Oregon and Washington have issued waivers to haulers saying you can take your 600 50,000 tons or your 60,000 tons of recyclables and landfill them until the market corrects. So they have a state law that says you can't do that. It's a ban, but they have the ability and the legal ability and authority to do that. And that's the only way out, or those haulers are going to go out of business and the material is just going to end up as litter. So everybody was, as I say, was looking to India, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, Ecuador, Korea, and Singapore. Please, please take our material that China wouldn't take. And for about a month they did. And then they said, no, we don't want it either. We're not taking any more crap than China is. And we realized they have a problem in Thailand cleaning up their own beaches. They don't need any more of our stuff to have a problem. So that was the immediate knee-jerk reaction of a lot of the folks in the industry, was and cocktail parties or whatever. Oh, they'll take it. And if you look at Ecuador, went up 19,000%. They probably took 2 bales of cardboard instead of 1. It just, the volume is not even close to what China was taking. So going forward, in terms of what's next, more environmental compliance inspections on the part of the Chinese, and it'll be advertised more. Lower numbers of improved imports, and a potential ban on additional paper, plastics, and non-ferrous. They actually instituted a 30-day ban in May. They wouldn't take anything, whether it passed specification or not. No explanation, just it's going to sit there at the port. And you can imagine the stream of ships that were coming across. All of a sudden they go, well, what do we do? Do we turn around or do we float? We just sit here and tread water for 30 days. The economics of paying for all of that is just huge. It's just beyond comprehension. But they're very serious about what they're doing. And as Jerry Powell loves to say, this is some of the impact of what we're having currently. Even when China was buying our material, we were still putting, when we had the paper rate, if you remember, was in the 60%, we were still throwing what was left away. And here's your dollar value. And I think these are in older values, but at least $6.5 billion, we're just taking out of our pocket and throwing it in the ground. This is the best argument I can make for why we've got to do better. And I know we're into it now, but this shows you a projection out of Massachusetts, and I can't see the right hand. I think that's, yeah, there.
2,182,000.
Yep. That's what they're projecting by 2025 will be the excess amount of municipal solid waste that we don't have capacity for in the New England region to handle.
That's 2 million tons.
That's a lot of tons.
Multiply that by 2,000 to get the amount of pounds.
We could build a pyramid with that, maybe 2. What's happening around New England is a number of burn plants and a number of smaller landfills have been closed. But right here in 2019, Michael, you can see my cursor now, right?
Yep.
Okay. So you see the drop from 18 to 19, the 1,000,006 down to 842.
50%.
800,000 tons are going to be looking for a home next year. This has actually been accelerated a little bit. For the entire New England region, including, I think, New York, the number's supposed to be not 2 million, but 5 million tons. And currently, a lot of those tons out of Massachusetts, because of the shutdown of these 2 landfills, Chicopee Falls and Southbridge in Mass, that drops the capacity to 842, and then again to 621, not too far beyond that. They're now shipping by rail, bailing the trash, shipping it by rail out to Ohio.
So Michael, I put my economics hat on. Does someone have a speaker on? If you do, turn it off because we can hear some feedback. By decreasing the landfill capacity, which means the supply of landfill space, the price per ton should be going up. And if the price per ton for disposal is going up, then it's going to be much more attractive to recycle.
Our best hope for recycling is that the trash number goes from 70 to 150. And if that happens, and it could, if we continue down the road that this chart shows, if that happens, those towns that are in trouble with recycling are going to be even more trouble with trash, because 65% of what they've got is trash. Those $175,000 increases in their budget and the $400,000 and the $720,000 increases in their budget are going to look like chump change.
You're right.
With $150 a ton for trash.
It'll be interesting to see what the ratepayers or the citizens do when that happens.
No question. This shows you the top line is New England. The least expensive in the country, I think, was Waco, Texas, because they had a big hole to fill.
The tipping fee, just let people know, tipping fee is the cost of delivering a ton of material to a landfill or a waste to energy facility.
It's actually the cost when that truck tips. Right. You still have to pay to get the truck there.
Right.
So there's additional. So if you've got a tipping fee of $70, you could very well have another $25 or $30 in hauling costs to get the material to that tipped floor or to the burn plant, the landfill or the burn plant, either one. So if you use total all-in cost, we're probably pushing 100 now, but we don't see it as much or we don't recognize as much. But these are numbers that everybody's going to be playing with here pretty soon. So I give credit to Susan Robinson from Waste Management out of Washington State. When written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of two characters. One represents danger and the other represents opportunity. The danger part of this, the Chinese phrase, is we do nothing. The opportunity is we put on a fast-track development for domestic capacity, and we stop making material that we can't reuse. But we take positive action. Otherwise, we're going to just be buried in this stuff. It's almost going to be like outer space, where there's 40,000 pieces of junk floating around that we just left out there. That's a whole different ballgame. The upshot of the discussion in last October was clean up your recycling stream. Stop mixing material together, even if it's convenient for your residents to do it. You've got to convince them. If you don't want to separate the material out, or you don't want to make sure that food waste is in with your fibers, then you're going to pay a hefty price when we get to pushing those MSW or municipal solid waste numbers. They try and explain to them, try and be patient with your residents, don't freak them out, don't feed the trolls, but the biggest thing is clean up your recycling stream. MRF operators should be doing, it's all about quality. You can see here there's only 3 people on this line. The line probably should have 8 people on it. It would be expanded back here. But produce a quality product, and you can move it still domestically. Most of the domestic mills have said, we're not going to take anything out of a single stream MRF because we know it's contaminated no matter how good a job they do, but we will take it out of source separated programs. So even if you slow down the line, even if you talk to your customers, even if you hire more workers and add new technology, you're still not going to make 0.005. You'll get a better material, and there will be some domestic folks that'll say, yeah, we can take it and we'll put the extra time in or whatever to make it work. But it's not going to go to China, that's for sure. Change your thinking. China's not going back to pre-green fence. Other Asian markets may be a temporary Band-Aid. This was done in March, and by the time it was published, the Band-Aid was over. Change your messaging. Recycling's not free. For the longest time, the revenues that came from recycling pretty much offset the costs or made a little bit of money, so people felt like they were making money on recycling, which they were because they were covering costs. But now with the numbers the way they are, it's been flipped. And the contamination are just causing a huge problem for everybody, no matter where it is. Recycling, as we talked about, does create jobs. Refocus on waste diversion. Don't put it in the waste stream to start with. Encourage as much backyard composting as possible, and it won't ever get in the waste stream. And there's the other piece about the metrics. I don't know that you need to change metrics. We need to change what we're doing. Quality, quality, quality. All 3 of these came from different perspectives at different times. They all said the same thing. We need to do a better job of producing a clean product. If we can produce a clean product, we'll get paid for it. The economics, and they're invested in the infrastructure needed to do a good recycling program, will start to pay off even more. when we were approached initially, NRRA, about endorsing single stream, we were hesitant and we didn't endorse it because other than it's another option for those towns that felt like they could save some money on collection. But for those towns that had balers and storage and the ability to load trucks, it made no sense to pay somebody to come get cardboard when you could get paid for it, as long as it met specification. And that's more true today than ever before. Just the usual explanation. We do training every month at our office in Epsom. Next month, we're actually going to be at the Harvey facility on a bus tour, and then we're going to Wellesley, which is a source-separated facility. As going back to our articles of incorporation in terms of educating the population, part of why I'm doing this talk is that type of thing. I'll be talking on Friday and then again at 2 planning commission meetings in the month of October. But we try and keep folks up to date as best we can when the market's changing as fluidly as it has been. Our school club leads the way in terms of getting the 4th graders out, because they're the ones that are going to make a huge difference. There's a fellow right now named Boyan Slat. He's an Amsterdam person that we followed since he was 18. He just sailed out of San Francisco Harbor with a huge boom attachment that's going to try and collect plastic out of the gyre north of Hawaii. He was scuba diving in the Greek Isles when he was 18, and his friend saw all the fish and was making noise pointing at the fish. Whoa, look at all the fish. And it was all plastic bags. And that convinced him that he better do something about it, and he's raised all kinds of money, and we're hoping he's going to be a success. But that type of innovation, we're counting on coming from folks that are going to be in this a lot longer than those of us on this call even. Ben was a keynote speaker at our conference. We do a conference every year, 2 days of intensive training for the operators. New Hampshire's the only state in the nation that requires that the operators of transfer stations be trained, both because of safety and because of how complicated this marketplace is. And all of our trainings are certified by NHDES. So for market projections, most of you can't recognize this fellow, Johnny Carson, but he used to put an envelope up to his head and guess what was going to happen. This was done again even before Jerry Powell's thing, and I love the fact that major unforeseen events could occur, totally undermining the stability of the recycling industry. Ain't that the truth? All right, your best defense against China's national sword is the NRA. And this is just a partial listing of the materials that we track on a monthly basis to give folks some sense of what the value is for material. You can see baled mixed paper was a charge of $65 here. That a year ago would pay you $85. $85 paid versus $65 charged. You don't want any part of this market the way it is right now. This is as difficult to follow as a normal stock market is that has ups and downs. The current one's only had ups, but in the typical market, that's what we're doing all day long, is trying to follow what the cost is to figure out how we can help the members. I don't like getting my picture taken that much, but I do like recognizing the folks over in Rye. They had 17 different programs, and they had revenues from recycling of 22 grand and cost avoidance of just not throwing it away in the trash of another 42,000, so $64,000. Sunapee had another 40,000 or so. So between the two of them, over $100,000 was netted by their recycling program. This was Wednesday of August 8th. I was delivering a presentation at Dartmouth Hitchcock, and China laid a 25% tariff on cardboard and imports from the US. Didn't even bother to call me, so I could update my slide. Thursday, 10 a.m., breaking news, aluminum markets won't be moving for 4 to 6 weeks. They haven't moved since then. There's something going on in the aluminum can market that they're over capacity, they just can't take it. Then e-waste pricing suffered major cost increase of at least 25% because of the plastic market's collapse.
E-waste being electronic.
E-waste being electronic waste. Yep, sorry. And then scrap metal prices were expecting a large decrease, and it actually was $30 to $40 a gross ton. I took the phone off the hook and didn't answer the phone for the weekend. So then we come in on Monday and we move 3 loads of cardboard, 2 plastics with 2 stops because we pick up half from one member and half from the other because they didn't have a full load. 1 aluminum load did move. Tires were picked up. Scrap metal was booked. Freon was removed. Scheduled a press release talking about how glass has now found a new market. So this is what we deal with all day long. And we try and make a difference wherever we can. The markets themselves are incredibly complicated at this time. And it's going to give us the opportunity to do something. If we seize that opportunity, we're going to be fine. If we don't, we're going to be in trouble. So we're going to be looking at paper, glass, plastic, metal. We're going to have organics over here. We're not saying we're going back to strictly source separated, but for those communities that can do that, and a number have gone back from single stream, we're seeing more and more progress to that. But they've got to have enough room to store a full load of material. And as always, thank you for recycling.
So thank you, Michael.
Right on 8 o'clock. Look at that.
Yeah, right at 8 o'clock. But I have some questions.
Thank you very much.
Have been building up. So I'll start with Shamika.
Happy to take it.
You had your hand raised, so if you want to turn on your microphone and ask the question.
Yes. Yeah, I actually had a couple of questions. So the first one was, if we're not in New Hampshire or in any of the states that participate in NRRA, how do we get our municipalities and those specifically in charge of waste management to consider what's happening in China and how this will affect our areas? I know I specifically live in a town that takes single stream, and that's exactly what you're saying is not great. Another question is, and I'll just stick to 2 instead of the 4 I had. The second one is, you mentioned, I forgot his name, but I had also been following him.
Boyan Slat.
I'm sorry?
Boyan Slat?
Yes.
Yes.
So the work that he is doing, as awesome as I think it is, it does not change the behavior of humans and how we are continuing to put so much waste into the cycle. And part of some of the implications for that work could lead to people actually thinking, because we can clean this up, we may not need to do all the work that we need to in order to do better at, having all of the trash in our oceans to begin with. So can you speak a little bit to that and what other mechanisms that we can implement to, I guess, combat the negative behaviors that may happen?
I think both are excellent questions, and the plastic one first. I've heard the argument before that, he's not going to change behavior, he's not going to do this. Sooner or later, we're going to have to clean up the ocean anyway. I think, I have not talked to him, and I don't know what he's thinking in that regard, but we've got to clean that stuff up. There's no question. So he's not trying to solve the whole problem. He's just trying to solve part of the problem. The best approach, I think, that I've heard so far is in Norway, where, again, go back to the lead-lined batteries, the government passed a legislation telling the plastics manufacturers, you have to stop creating this mess, and the only thing you can make is material that you can guarantee will be recycled at a rate of over 95%, or you'll pay a penalty. The first year this program went into effect, none of the plastics manufacturers paid a penalty. They all hit the 95% or more mark. And the way they did it was they limited the production of the plastics to just 2 resins. So they didn't have all these multi-layer pouches that you had to separate out before you could reuse them or remanufacture them. They kept it very simple, but they put the onus on the producers. And there's a lot of work done in producer responsibility. Some of it's really good, some of it's really effective. Some of it would be hit by the same argument as the one against Boyan going out to Hawaii. I just take my hat off to the kid that's trying to make a difference. We try and recognize that wherever it happens. And one year there was if you talk about the increase in cost, the Republic company, which is, and I haven't mentioned all the other ones, but I shouldn't pick on Republic. they're just one of the large companies nationwide. They're in Plaquemines Parish picking up single stream on the curbside. They went to the parish council and said, we're going to have to double your rate from $25 to $50. And the counselor said, well, we're halfway into the budget. We don't have any money. We're going to cancel the recycling program. The next parish council meeting, the whole 7th grade and every football supporter and every parent and every teacher went to the parish council meeting and said, no. You're going to pay the $50. We need to keep recycling. And one of the poor council members made the mistake of saying, so how many want to pay for that? And every hand went up, and that was it. That was the end of the discussion. So the 7th graders did a great job, and we were able to recognize that. Queen Elizabeth banned plastic from the royal residences back in February of this year. And it was just in August of this year that McDonald's decided they would take up the hint, if you will, and do it as well. So there are things that can be done. The type of thing they're doing in Norway, though, is the one that really makes an impact immediately. What town are you talking about that has a single stream program that you live in?
I live in New York. It's the town of Huntington. I had worked for the municipality before.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to think of, what the power structure looks like, especially now in the new political climate, and how the different community levers work currently that can then lead to that change. Because you're saying use the 7th graders. I'm thinking the only recycling program that we have in the schools is really in the high school, but it was a club and it's not really working. There's a whole set of issues that I'm thinking through for this particular municipality, and leveraging something like using the school children in a place where maybe they don't already have that culture of recycling implemented to then drive that change, and how then I would think of other ways to drive that change based on the culture here.
I think that we're convinced that the school is the one that really can help, and we're just completing a town and gown USDA grant. I can tell you that Gwen early on our staff, her goal is to have at least one school from every state of the union. We've already gotten Puerto Rico, Texas, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, and Illinois. So she's marching across the country trying to line up schools that can work and just use the programs that we have. And if you wanted to contact her, I'm sure she'd send stuff to the schools without any problem. And it's material that they can use easily in the school. For example, we do what we call a trash on the lawn day, where we have the kids dump all the trash on a tarp and then measure it, weigh it, and figure out what it's worth if they were to recycle it versus throw it away. Those types of programs have been most effective, and I would encourage you to look at the school club site that is tied to our NRA site, because I think that would help. The only other piece to hit them with, obviously, is go to the budget committee and find out why you're paying so much for your trash and your recycling to start with.
Okay, so Natty, I see you have a question.
Yes. So I'm not going to ask that question anymore. My new one is I live in Greenfield, Massachusetts. We have a source separated material recycling program.
Yep.
Both in at all municipal buildings, but also for residents. We don't have private pickup. All of our materials go to the Springfield facility, where then after that I don't know where it would go.
Goes to Bill Ricca.
Oh.
Bill Ricca is a single stream plant run by Waste Management, I believe.
Uh-huh.
And it used to be,
no, did I say single stream? I meant we have source separated.
yes, you do. And but if you're if you go into Springfield and they don't process it there anymore, I don't believe. I haven't actually been there to see this, so it's secondhand, but I'm pretty sure what happened was Waste Management used to operate a dual stream facility in Springfield. They shut that down, and so when you bring in your source separated, it all goes in one bucket and goes to Bill Rickard to single stream.
Great. So I guess on that, my question would be, how does a municipality who is already taking the steps we need to take, we don't necessarily right now have an option, or we haven't come up with an option of where to go so that it's continually source separated.
Right.
What can we do to ensure that those costs are actually incurred by municipal residents to ensure that it's properly recycled?
What town do you
Your best
live in?
bet, and this
Greenfield,
Mass.
What town do you live in?
Greenfield, Massachusetts.
Do any other towns come into the Greenfield facility?
I believe Leiden, which is a small village town.
And what's the population of Greenfield?
Greenfield is 19,000, something like that.
So 5 times. So what you need to look at, or someone does, and they will be looking at it, I guarantee you, if the numbers we've talked about come to pass, you need to look at the town of Derry, New Hampshire, which is probably about 40,000, which is twice what you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they spent, the gal down there, Joni Hamill, spent 10 years convincing every resident, select board member, city council member, anybody that came into the transfer station that she needed a new facility. She finally convinced them, but she convinced them based on her numbers. I think this year she generated something like $435,000 in revenues. They spent $2.4 million on a Taj Mahal of source-separated recycling facility. And I say that not derisively, but it's a beautiful facility. That's a 20-year bond. If you put that up against, 20 years of paying Waste Management more and more money every year, because that's what's going to happen, I think it's going to stand the test of time, certainly. But at the end of that 20 years, when the bond is paid off, it won't owe the town anything, and you'll still be getting, let's say you only get $150,000 a year. You don't get $400,000. But that'll be the only facility in the town of Greenfield that can generate that kind of revenue. The school's not going to generate it. The fire department's not going to generate it. And for sure, the town offices aren't going to generate it except by taxes. A source-separated facility can be a huge asset to the town. But you've got to step back and look at it and say, okay, let's make the investment. And it may only, the town of Guilford, I think, was going to spend $900,000 on a new source-separated facility, which basically amounts to a baler and a place to store material once it's baled and a loading dock. Because as soon as you've got those 3 things in place, you can ship it anywhere out to New York. You can get paid the $120 a ton for your cardboard, or you can get paid, let's say 80 cents a pound for aluminum cans when they start moving again. So the revenues are there, and I think the values of the commodities are going to increase as the amount of material we have on the planet diminish. Rare earth is going to become even more expensive as we run out of it. Well, same with aluminum. And if they ever changed over what they're doing with plastic and just did 1s and 2s, and that was all you could do was 1s and 2s. You couldn't make a coffee can that was a 2 on the bottom and it was a 5 on the top that was screwy. But the more they get to the economics of this, the more they're going to realize we have to change what we're doing. And I think the plastic in the ocean, just to go back for a minute, besides what Boylan's doing, trying to go out to Hawaii, the impact has gone viral on that. When people look at a plastic bag and they're told that's in the bottom of the Marianas Trench, 36, however deep that is, that's the deepest part of the ocean. We've got a plastic bag down there. We've got whales washing up on the shores of Thailand with 80 garbage bags inside them. We've got birds out on Midway Island that are full of Coca-Cola caps because they're bright and shiny and red and they look like fish or something to the birds, and they're dying because of it. We've got mosquitoes that are ingesting plastic. You could go on and on and on with all the reasons why plastic has really come to the forefront. And again, you either fail to take the opportunity or you're going to be in trouble. And I think the impact of those visuals is going to create a new generation of recyclers that goes back to the crying Indian for litter, which a lot of you won't remember, but that was a defining moment in recycling. When people turned into Walter Cronkite for the first time and they saw the Cuyahoga River in Ohio on fire, it didn't matter if they were Republican or Democrat. Rivers aren't supposed to be on fire. The next year, the EPA was formed. And it's got a little bit of challenge right now, but it's done a lot of good work for a long time, but it was because of that defining moment. So China shutting off what we've been doing is going to force us to change. And it'll force us to change a lot quicker than any education and outreach we can do, but we need to do both at the same time.
So Michael, could you stop sharing your screen for a moment so I can see everyone? Okay, great. If anybody else has a final question, put a thumbs up. This is your chance. Well,
All great questions. Thank you very much.
and Michael, thank you for your time. I mean, one of the comments that came by me was like, how does he have all this in his head?
I got a very big head. No.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I'm glad the comments were okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
very much. And if you could send me the final slideshow, I'll get it up on their class Sakai site.
I'll bring it to you on Friday.
Okay, thanks.
It's too large to send otherwise, I think.
Yeah, I understand.
I'll try.
Is
So
it
have a
on
good
the?
night, people, and thank you for.
Is it on the NRAA?
This particular one isn't there yet, but it will be. But most of the slides are there, and there's a number of other articles that'll help you too. Thank you.
Okay, have a good evening, folks.